And a good day. Welcome. This is Take Two with Jerry and Debbie on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network. We gather for this 55 minutes together Monday through Friday. The show re-airs, by the way, at midnight Eastern Time. So I know many of our listeners catch the later program, the later airing during the day. But what we're going to discuss with your takes today at 1-800-585-9396 is something that is certainly in the news. People are talking about it, Debbie. And it's really a very important issue, and that is the refugee flow, which is, it's taken on proportions that, at least in my lifetime, I just don't seem to recall the numbers of refugees that are fleeing countries such as Syria and many others. And then there's the question, Debbie, of, are they accompanied by or are they embedded in those groups of refugees? Those who would potentially bring harm to individuals of a country or to a nation's security, terrorists, or however you want to look at that. So it's going to be a very important topic and broadcast today.
And that's what we're talking about today, the refugee crisis and how we should respond as Catholic Christians. We see the faces of the desperate looks amongst the women and the men and the children, and it pulls at our heartstrings. We all know that. We know that when we see those desperate faces, we want to leap out and help. And we've even had the hierarchy of our church say that we should open the doors and embrace. But is it without, are we inviting danger? Is it the most proper thing for us to do, the most prudent thing for us to do? That is what we're talking about today on Take Two. But we need to hear from you because, dear listeners, you drive this conversation. You allow us to explore and expand and to come to a greater understanding. We can't do it without you. So we're going to ask you to call in and share your take. You've been watching the news. You've been hearing it all over the place. Everybody's talking about it. It's at the conversation at work. It's all over the newspapers. What should we do about the refugees? Should we accept them into our country? Should we open our arms? Should we open our doors? 1-800-585-9396. 1-800-585-9396. Please share your take on this.
Yeah, and just if you even take a cautious approach to this, sometimes you are labeled insensitive, intolerant. You're not compassionate, and things like this. So we are pleased and blessed to have with us to help us understand this topic better today. Robert Spencer joins us. He's been studying Islamic theology, law, and history in depth since 1980. He's the director of Jihad Watch. If you just put a .org on the end of that, you will find them on the internet. Robert is the author of 14 books, including the New York Times bestsellers, The Truth About Muhammad and The Politically Incorrect Guide to Islam. And his latest book is The Complete Infidel's Guide to ISIS, and coming next year, The Complete Infidel's Guide to Iran. Robert Spencer has led seminars on Islam and Jihad for the FBI, the U.S. Central Command, the U.S. Army Command, and others. Robert, it is good to have you with us here. Our listeners have heard you many times on Cresta in the afternoon. Thank you for joining us on Take Two with Jerry and Debbie.
Great to be here. Thank you.
There's so many places where we could start this conversation. Where I really like to start, Robert, is your family actually comes from a part of the world, if I have it right, your grandparents were forced to flee because they were Christians. You yourself are a member of the Melkite Greek Catholic Church, which actually the adherents are mostly concentrated in Lebanon and Syria. So tell us, personally for you, what does this refugee situation represent? How do you feel about it?
Well, certainly, yes. My family my grandparents were refugees. They were exiled from the Ottoman Empire for declining to convert to Islam, and they were very grateful to be in the United States. They were very grateful for everything that America had to offer them, and were fiercely patriotic and very, very aware of the uniqueness of America in welcoming refugees and in allowing them to live free lives, free of persecution and harassment that they had come to be accustomed to at home. That all said, the refugee crisis of today is to some degree different for some important reasons. One is, in contrast to the families who were exiled at the time, including my own, of the end of World War I and the collapse of the Ottoman Empire, and in contrast to many other refugee crises around the world, this one is characterized by some very odd anomalies. One being that most of the refugees, about 70%, are young Muslim males between the ages of 18 and 40. They are not with their families for the most part, and they are not the Christians who have been driven out and driven from their homes in Iraq and Syria. We don't see, for the most part, that kind of thing. And so you have to wonder, why is it that these men would flee, if they're really fleeing a war zone, without their families? Why would they leave their families in the war zone? And where are the Christians who have been actually the majority of the people genuinely displaced by the conflict in Syria and Iraq? And further, then, there's another strange detail, and that is that a large majority of these refugees who are coming in as Syrian refugees, often with forged Syrian passports, are not Syrians at all, but are Moroccans, Algerians, Pakistanis, people who are not fleeing war zones at all, but are pretending to be Syrians to gain entree into Europe and then also into the United States.
So, Robert, let me ask you this based on what you just said, and this is fascinating because that's the first time I've ever heard that 70% are young Muslim males. I mean, we see the pictures of the women and the children and kind of the families kind of clutching with the one bag over their shoulder, which looks like all of their belongings that they were able to gather. And that really does weigh on all of us and press on our heart very deeply. So my question then is, when our bishops, when our United States bishops come out and make comments and make and advise us to open the doors and Catholic Charities, to be available, do they have all these facts before they are advising this, or are they somehow given partial facts? Because that's the first time I've ever heard of it, and I don't know maybe if the media is not reporting this, or what are we missing here?
Well, I can tell you that it has been widely documented, and so it's readily available. Anybody can, with a Google search, see that what I'm saying is accurate. Whether the bishops have this information or whether they've taken it into account, I have no way of knowing, but they have not made any public acknowledgement of it. And they have not made any distinction, and perhaps that's in line with the lineaments of Christian charity, not to make any distinction between Christian and Muslim refugees. The problem with that, however, is the fact that the Islamic State, or ISIS, last February warned that they were just about to flood Europe with 500,000 refugees, and that among those refugees would be jihad terrorists. And so to take in the Muslim refugees without any regard for that is to admit, or at least to have the possibility of admitting, these jihadis that the Islamic State has threatened to bring into Europe. They boasted in September, not long after the refugee crisis began, that they had already brought in 4,000 jihadis into Europe with the refugees. And then around the same time, the Lebanese education minister said that among the Syrian refugees who were waiting in his country to get to Europe, there were 20,000 active jihadis. And so this is a serious problem that has been reported by people who are in a position to know, such as the education minister in Lebanon, and yet there doesn't seem to be any acknowledgement of these facts on the part of the bishops in the United States. They are certainly correct that there is a humanitarian crisis, but it would be refreshing, I think, and perhaps a little bit more in line with the requirements of charity to our own homes and families, our own people here, to try to fashion some response to the humanitarian crisis that takes these facts into account.
Robert Spencer with us. It's Take Two with Jerry and Debbie. Here is our phone number. We are talking about the current refugee crisis around the world. We need to be compassionate. Christ himself would call upon us to reach out, to throw open our doors to those truly in need. Are there those among them, though, who want to bring trouble to our shores, to European shores, as they already have? And they, as Robert Spencer just said, they have vowed to do this. So, how do we strike a balance here? If you're not following this issue, I pity you, actually. You need to be. This is an issue every one of us needs to be well versed in. So share your take at 1-800-585-9396. We usually take a break right about now. Father Glenn and Edward and the others on the line, We're going to go just a couple more minutes here with Robert Spencer, then we'll get our break and your phone calls. Because, Robert, I want to stay on this topic of our bishops. They seem clearly concerned about the strict screening of refugees before they're allowed to enter the United States. But some of them or some others have pointed out that the hierarchy are relying heavily on the oversight and screening provided by our government. Okay, they're saying, well, once they get to us, to the church, they have been thoroughly screened, vetted. Any security threats have been eliminated. Is that trust well placed in your opinion?
Unfortunately not. And even the United States government has acknowledged that. I mean, Barack Obama, of course, has said that these refugees will be carefully vetted. But James Comey, the director of the FBI, has pointed out that actually is not even possible to do. And the reason for that is that while in Iraq, anybody who was fighting against the Americans and was caught, his identity was carefully recorded. And any Iraqi who was involved in jihad terror activity, if he came into the United States now as a refugee, he would probably be stopped. However, there is no such database for the Syrians. And it's Syria right now that is experiencing this massive civil war and huge social dislocation. But there are simply no records for Syrians. So as the FBI director, James Comey, pointed out, when Syrian refugees or people purporting to be or claiming to be Syrian refugees present themselves at refugee processing centers, there is absolutely no possible way to determine their identity, their past history, their allegiances, their possible connections with jihad groups, nothing. Not only that, but I just said moments ago that the Iraqi refugees would be much easier to screen. However, even that system has on occasion broken down. Just recently, there were two Muslims who were involved in murdering American soldiers in Iraq who were found to have been admitted into the United States as refugees and were living in Bowling Green, Kentucky, until they were discovered and reported. But they had no problem getting through the whole refugee crisis, being approved, and being able to settle in the United States.
Well, Robert, this is fascinating information. The first time I think a lot of our listeners, and including myself, have heard this, and this is really eye-opening and gives us, a better understanding of what we're facing. If we are going to open those doors, let's do it wisely, and I think this is a good discussion we're having. We need to take our first break, and when we come back after our break, we're going to have more with our guest, Robert Spencer, and first up is going to be Father Glenn. So hold on, Father. We want to take our quick break and then go right to you in South Bend, Indiana. But we're talking on Take Two today about the refugee crises. Is it something that we should embrace? Is it something that we should be cautious of? We're talking about that today because this is the conversation that we can have together and to grow together. So stay with us on Take Two. We'll be right back.
A lot of people have fallen into the lie that our church's teaching on sexual ethics, marriage, and gender is somehow hateful. But what is love? Love is willing what's good for someone else. It isn't good for children to tell them they might be one of over 50 genders. It's confusing. It isn't accepting to tell people to identify who they are with their attractions. It's demeaning. It isn't good for our bodies to engage in some of the things the secular gay community encourages. It's unhealthy. It isn't good for children or society to make mom and dad irrelevant words. It's tragic. It isn't good for our souls to act outside of the plan of God, etched into the nature of our procreating bodies. It's sin. Countless men and women with same-sex attraction are finding health, life, and the love we were made for in the Catholic Church. Now, you might disagree with how we care for them, but don't call it hate, because love isn't hate. This is Chris Stefanik from reallifecatholic.com on EWTN Radio.
Hello, this is Johnette Benkovic. Thanks for listening to the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network.
And we're glad you're with us. It's Take Two with Jerry and Debbie on EWTN. We'll get to some social media comments here shortly. Plenty of them on the Facebook page, which is, we invite you to like us, or the page at EWTN Catholic Radio. And for a very fine, I think, well-balanced article on this, it was in the EWTN's National Catholic Register by William Kilpatrick. You will find the link to that on take2show.com. Take2show.com is where you will find that. Our guest here on the program today is Robert Spencer. He is the head of Jihad Watch. JihadWatch.org is where you will find them. And we're going to go right to your calls because the phone lines are full. This is obviously a topic of great interest and no doubt passion for many of you. So we're going to start with Father Glenn, give deference to the clergy. Father, thank you for your vocation and thank you for your call today. How are you?
Very good. Thank you, Jerry. God bless you. Thanks for all you do.
Thank you.
The recent document that came out of the Synod that was published, I think, on October 24th, I don't know if it's available in English yet, but it does address the refugee crisis. And if I understood this correctly, my little Google Translate, my Italian, I don't really speak Italian, but it says right in there that the primary obligation falls to the local church. So what I think we should do is really try and marshal our resources and give as much resources as we can to help those people locally so that they don't have to be displaced across the ocean. They don't have to come into a different language. They're not forced into different things, which would make it much more difficult for them to get home after everything settles down, hopefully. So it seems like that's what the formal teaching says in that synodal document that was just published. As I said, it's not available in English yet, but I mean, that makes a lot of sense to try and give them all the support to the local churches there in the area to give the support to those refugees who are there.
Good point. Robert Spencer, your thoughts?
Well, if by the local church the Synod Fathers mean the church in Syria and Iraq, unfortunately, those churches have been decimated to a degree unprecedented in the history of the church. The Archbishop of Mosul in Iraq said several months ago, and I quote, "I have lost my diocese to Islam. You in the West will also become the victims of Muslims." He was referring to the absolute clearing out of Mosul of Christians, where the Christians were exiled or killed, forcibly converted to Islam, such that the Christian community in Mosul that had existed there since the beginning of the church simply no longer exists. And he was warning that because of the jihadi influx into Europe and the U.S., the same thing would happen here. So I don't know that there's any local church anymore in Iraq and Syria to be able to handle refugees, if that's what is meant. On the other hand, if what's meant is local churches in Europe and the United States, then that raises the questions of how they would be equipped to screen these people when the federal government doesn't have the resources to do it. So I'm not sure I understand the stipulation correctly, but I don't see how any way it could work.
Well, I would suspect that the local would be the most close church that would be able to be assisting. So in other words, I know that there's some talk of trying to develop a safe zone much more closer to their same cultural milieu, and I think if we can find that, I think the broader church, the non-local church, should be able to help whatever church is most closely related to those people. And they obviously need to move maybe to another country or whatever close in that area. But I don't think it implies the European churches or across the ocean. I would think it's trying to find those little local churches, whatever is left of them, or assistance in that way. But that's what it seems like the document's trying to say is the ideal circumstance.
Well, I just want to jump in there.
The great idea of a local area that could be made into some kind of a safe place for these refugees would be really, I think, the ideal solution, and that Saudi Arabia has plenty of space and linguistic and cultural and religious bond with most of the refugees that European countries and the United States don't have. Unfortunately, the Saudis have said they're not taking none of the refugees because of the possibility that there would be jihad terrorists embedded among them. But ideally, that would be the best solution.
And Father Glenn, thank you so much for your great points. I just wanted to jump in, and Robert, you had actually said it, so I just wanted to ask you this and kind of follow up on it. It sounds like an awesome idea to keep them where culturally they're safest and they fit in the best and they can thrive, the most effectively. But I mean, is there anybody spearheading that idea? It seems like when you turn on the local news, it's just scatter and be scattered all over the world. Am I correct in seeing that on the local news? Or, I mean, there doesn't seem like there's an effort to really, develop a long range plan.
Yeah, you're quite right. It seems as if all authorities seem to be taking for granted that this is the responsibility of Europe and the United States to handle. And the idea that Arabic-speaking people from an Arabic culture might be more comfortable in an Arabic setting, while some people have said it, there is no concrete plan to follow up on it in any way. And of course, it would be very difficult to implement. The Saudis, as I've said, they want no part of it, and no part of the refugees in any way. And of course, Syria and Iraq are decimated. The Turks are not Arabic-speaking, and they don't want a massive influx of Syrians into their country when they have all these tensions between Syria and Turkey. And, of course, then on the other side, there's just Iran. So there's not really any good place, possibly Jordan. But Jordan also has significant pockets of supporters of the Islamic State that would make any large-scale refugee settlement there very problematic as well.
Right. So again, we just want to thank Father Glenn. Thank you so much for your contribution today on Take Two. And again, I echo what Jerry says. Thank you for your vocation, Father, and thank you for taking the time to pray. Pray for us for Take Two, that it's successful and it drives souls closer to Christ, Father. And thank you so very much. Happy Advent to you. Okay, our guest is Robert Spencer. We're going to move right along. If you want to jump in, you can call in at 1-800-585-9396. We're talking about the refugee crisis, and we're going to go right to Manuel in Indiana. Manuel, welcome to Take Two with Jerry and Debbie and our guest, Robert Spencer.
Thank you
Hi.
very much for taking my call.
Sure.
The comment that I want to make is that we, as practicing Catholics, must undoubtedly follow what our Holy Father and the bishops said about the subject. The rest of it is spinning. Yeah, we are going to suffer. Maybe, maybe not. Did Jesus suffer for us? Yes, he did. So essentially my comment is the program for me is superfluous. We as Catholics follow our hierarchy, period. Thank you very much.
All right, Robert, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I certainly in sympathy with the broad assertion that we follow the authority, but at the same time, there are degrees of the authoritative weight of Catholic teaching for a reason, and that is so that we understand to what extent we are obligated to assent. And when the bishops make prudential judgments that have nothing to do with the teaching of the faith, I think that with great respect, we have not only a right but a responsibility to stand up and say that perhaps another course of action might be better. I mean, you take, for example, all the scandals with the priests and the sex scandals. If people had not spoken up, then the situation would have been much worse than it was. And there were some people who were willing to stand up and speak even when it involved being critical in a respectful manner of priests and bishops. I don't like being in this position. I wish I were not in this position. But I think that we have to, when we're weighing the ins and outs of the refugee crisis, we have to take into account the obligation of charity does not just extend to the refugees, but to our own families and our own people. And that to bring in a large number of people who might have killers among them and people who hate the church and want to destroy Christianity among them, that's not being charitable to our own people here. And
Robert, hold that thought for just a
responsibility
second.
to
We got a break here, and we will come back with more of Take Two with Jerry and Debbie and Robert Spencer.
This is Al Cresta, host of Cresta in the Afternoon. And Cresta in the Afternoon looks at all of life through the lens of Scripture and the teaching of the Catholic Church. Church teaching is the light by which we view the world, and so we'll explore everything, from abortion to Hollywood, and from the First Amendment to the United Nations, and everything in between. Following St. Paul, we're seeking transformation through the renewing of our minds. So that's Cresta in the Afternoon with me, Al Cresta, weekdays 4 to 6 p.m. Eastern on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network.
60 Seconds with Mother Angelica.
Are you and I a friend of Jesus? That's the important one. See? He will never let you down. He will always be forgiving and merciful and compassionate. You can't say that of any friend. And so, I have a wonderful friend, and we've been friends for 40 years. Wonderful. I think that's a big grace. Scripture says, if you have found such a one, praise God. But ordinarily, you can't say that you would tell your very heart to this one or that one. To some, it would be like putting it in the newspaper. Be all over town, half hour. Where you wouldn't talk to a friend like that. But with Jesus, you can talk to any friend. You can talk to him as the best of friends.
People you know and trust are on EWTN.
EWTN is now on Twitter. Get short, timely messages from EWTN on your computer or cell phone. It's easy to stay up to date on a wide variety of topics. Pro-life news, Vatican announcements, catechesis, apologetics, the latest EWTN programming, and more. You can link to EWTN on Twitter from our homepage or go to twitter.com/EWTN. At work, at home, at school, and on the road. Stay connected to your world with EWTN's Twitter page.
It's Take Two with Jerry and Debbie on EWTN. Our guest is Robert Spencer. Refugees, threat, or both? What are we dealing with the refugee crisis around the world right now? Robert, my sincere apologies for having to jump in there. That's the one hard break during the show that we can't change. So you were in the middle of a thought there. If you have anything you want to finish up there, you're welcome to do so before we take our next call.
Well, I was just saying that when we weigh the refugee crisis, we have to recall that the obligation of charity is not just toward the refugees, but we also have an obligation of charity toward those whom jihad terrorists among the refugees might end up killing, and an obligation to try to prevent that from happening if we have the means to do so.
Right.
All right, here is our phone number. We have a line open for you if you'd like to join us in this conversation. 1-800-585-9396. This is something we have to be paying attention to. We want to be compassionate. Absolutely. I mean, there's so much I could say, but we want your takes on the show, folks. 800-585-9396. Bill in Oregon, hang on. Carol in Iowa. I think Debbie and I each had maybe just a quick analogy that we could give. I'm thinking of a family. You know, it's the father's and the mother's immediate duty to protect a family. Now, maybe they think as a family project, we're going to go downtown and take sandwiches to homeless people and so forth. And the news reports state that, you know, among the homeless, there are some who would harm people's children or attempt to kidnap them or whatever. At that point, this is what we're saying, dear listeners. It's at that point that the parents have to stop and say, wait a minute, is this the best thing for me to do? Am I putting my family in danger? We want to be compassionate. We want to be empathetic. We want to do what Christ would do, you know, the Beatitudes. And, you know, whenever you fed me, whenever you fed one of the little ones, you fed me. When you gave him a drink, you did it for me. We don't want to get away from that. That's a danger in this, is that we could move away from doing the corporal works of mercy. But again, it has to be prudent, and it has to be done, I think, with thorough and adequate screening. Debbie, I don't know if you had something you wanted to share.
No, I think you shared that beautifully. I loved your analogy. But the thing, I was just thinking on a daily basis, Robert, I mean, when we hear about how we as Catholic Christians need to respond in a Christ-like manner, I think about all of the streets that I drive on, and I see the homeless people with signs saying, can I have a lift to the local bus station, or a hitchhiker on the road and I live in Arizona, so we've got a lot of desert roads. I mean, am I supposed to be picking up these people when I possibly could have children in my car? I mean, that's dangerous because I don't know the background. I mean, it doesn't make me it doesn't make me, I think what I'm trying to say, Robert, is I don't want to feel like I'm not a good Christian because I'm not stopping and picking up and taking care of every single person that I don't know the background of. I don't feel that's a good thing to do to my spirituality, because I don't want to play on the scrupulosity of that to say that I'm going to open my doors to everybody, and regardless of their background, just because I'm Christian, I should do that. Does that make me a bad Christian?
Debbie, I think that's a very excellent, very superb, perceptive analogy that puts into sharp relief what the problem is here. That charity is not an obligation to open yourself up to danger. It's not an obligation to commit suicide. It's not an obligation to put yourself in a position to be beaten and who knows what else. This is, I think, something that people are confused about because, of course, the Lord says if somebody strikes you on one cheek, you turn the other. So you don't retaliate in revenge, but that doesn't mean that you place yourself in danger needlessly. And above all, charity, even some who would say, no, you lay down your life in all circumstances, even in that case, you don't have an obligation to force others to lay down their lives. And as a matter of fact, it would be uncharitable to do so. If you're going to lay down your life, you should be doing it to protect those people whom the Lord has placed in your life, your family, your children, and so on. And that means, if that means that you cannot offer everything to the stranger and the wayfarer that you might wish to be able to, because you simply don't know who he is, or what his agenda is, or what he's going to do, that's not uncharitable. And these are very important distinctions that need to be made today.
Thank you. Thank you for clarifying that. And so we're going to move right along to Bill in Oregon, listening on Modern Day Radio. Bill, thank you so much for waiting patiently. Welcome to Take Two with Jerry and Debbie and our guest, Robert Spencer. Hi, Bill.
Hi. I'm a little disheartened by your conversation. I think as Christians, and I would look for you as producers and hosts to also vet your guest a little bit more. It's very important for us to remember that, for example, if there's 100,000 people waiting to get into the United States right now, and Mr. Spencer says, well, 70% of them are males between 18 and 45 who could be terrorists with people embedded, then take the 30,000 women and children that are waiting and bring them in. Why wait? Why wait for those people and discriminate against them because you're worried about the 70% that could be harmful to us, or part of the 70% that could be harmful? And the other thing is, I haven't heard either of that statistic that he threw out. I wish you'd vet that a little more carefully. The other thing is, in Oregon, we have our last Republican governor was a Syrian American, and his whole family is here. They distinguished themselves as good American citizens in our state. And we'd be remiss, I think, if we turned our backs on those members of his family that are still in Syria, that have been displaced by this terrible war, which in no small part was caused by our conflict and our destruction that we caused in Iraq, that they could possibly be rejected just because they're Syrians. That's why, not because they're Arab-speaking.
Thank you, Bill, for your very candid thoughts. We appreciate that, and we always welcome, honest, charitable dialogue on the show. We'll try and take a couple of his points. Robert, I don't recall you saying that we should not, kind of throw the baby out with the bathwater and not try and be compassionate and welcoming to those who really do seem to be in need. I don't know, Robert, was that something you said? I don't recall hearing that.
No, actually, I didn't say that. The gentleman was assuming a bit too much to make his case. In reality, I thought he had a really good idea that bringing in the women and children might be a very good way to to cut this Gordian knot a bit and to relieve some of the genuine humanitarian crisis. Meanwhile, in terms of vetting, he obviously was casting doubts on the demographic data that I offered. So I can tell you that it comes from the UN High Commissioner on Human Rights, which said November 17th, 2015, which is just, last week, released a survey showing that actually 75% of the refugees are men, 13% children, 12% women. And so I repeat what I said earlier in the show. In a genuine humanitarian crisis, in a genuine refugee crisis, those men would bring their families. And the fact that they're not is something that we need to ponder the implications of very carefully.
Right.
Bill,
and can I just...
Go ahead,
I just
Debbie.
jump in before Bill responds? And Bill, I just wanted to say that I've been watching the local news and it's, or actually the national news, and it's been saying that they tried this idea of possibly suggesting to bring in the women and children, and that wasn't going to happen. They weren't going to split up or discriminate. And Robert, have you heard that same? Because I've heard the same thing, that a lot of people are saying that. Why don't we just have the women and children come in? But that's not an option.
No, I hadn't heard that had already been rejected. I'm not surprised, but it just points out the great difficulty of dealing with this. Also, as I noted before, the UN High Commissioner on Human Rights also in their survey showed that only 51% of the refugees are actually Syrians, and the rest are from all over the Middle East and North Africa, where they're not coming from war zones. And so that also is something that needs to be pondered. This is information coming from the UN, which is exhorting Western countries to take the refugees, so it's hardly biased data.
Bill, follow up from you. No, it looks like I think Bill may
you're
have
still there?
He may have hung up the phone to listen to the responses. And I would just add, and Robert, I know you would. In fact, I'm not even going to add anything. I'm going to let you. He mentioned, I believe it was the last Republican governor in the state of Oregon was a Syrian American, which I think is a beautiful thing, Robert, and must make you very proud.
Yeah, that was another thing. I have to admit that I thought that quite a bit of what this caller was saying was personally offensive to me, as if I'm some sort of a anti-Syrian or anti-Arab racist, when actually, as you noted at the beginning of the show, I'm a Melkite Greek Catholic. My family is from that part of the world. I'm very happy that there was a Syrian American who was governor of Oregon. Is that what he said? I'm not familiar with the gentleman, but I'm sure he's a great American and a great citizen and was a fine governor. The problem here is not Syrians. The problem here is not Arabs. The problem is that there are Islamic jihadis among the refugees, and that is something that I don't think is charitable to ignore.
Right. Well, Robert, well said. And I think Bill was very passionate, and I think we all are. And if Bill, if you're listening, please understand that when we see the faces of those desperate women and children trying to be free and to get free of all of the, horrible surroundings that made them leave their homeland, we feel the same way, Bill. So please understand that, and thank you for your contribution today. We're going to move right along to, let's see, Carol, waiting again so patiently in Iowa, listening on St. Gabriel Communications. Hi, Carol. Welcome to Take Two with Jerry and Debbie and our guest, Robert Spencer.
Hello. Thank you for taking my call. First, I would like to say thank you to Robert for bringing these issues to light on a Catholic network. I appreciate that. My thinking is that we are being absolutely naive to ignore the statistics and the data that we have that indicates for a fact that we are opening our doors to these radical people that are out to hurt Christians. I think it's naive of us to do that, and I think it's important that we exercise prudence as we go through this process and consider that we are held accountable. We are responsible for protecting our children. I'm the mother of 3, and I will do that because it is my responsibility as a mother, and I think it's foolish for us to ignore what's happening. And
Robert, you want to respond to Carol?
Well, I thank you. I appreciate it. I couldn't agree more. I think that is the heart of the matter here, that we are being told that we have to admit these refugees on humanitarian grounds and as a requirement of Christian charity. And I am impressed and very grateful to hear you pointing out so lucidly that we have a requirement of Christian charity to our own people to avoid exposing them to needless danger, and that it would be naive not to take that into account.
Thank
Carol,
you, Carol.
Any other thoughts, Carol, before we
Robert,
let you?
thank you.
All right. Thank you, Carol and I. Calling 1-800-585-9396. Phone lines are full, so we're just going to continue along to Mary, also in Iowa. Mary, thank you for calling. Take Two with Jerry and Debbie. You're up next. Hello.
Hi, Mary.
Hi, Mary.
Oh, hi there. More Iowans. You know, I'm not an astute historian, but it brings to mind the Trojan horse of the past. But I'm just very grateful to hear all of these points, and I think it just points out that we must be aware and beware and just make, I think, with a great deal of prayer, make the most responsible considerations. And I'm a retired registered nurse, so my heart absolutely goes out to the families, especially mothers and children. So I'm going to be that much more aware and discerning and support all of those in positions to make these critical judgments, to do so in the most humanitarian. And I've already called and said, we must be realistic, but we must also be compassionate at the same time. So thank you for all you're doing.
Robert, would you like to respond?
Well, in terms of the Trojan horse, it reminds me that it's also worth mentioning that in the Paris attacks just a couple weeks ago, where over 130 people were murdered by Islamic jihadis, two of the jihadis who were carrying out the attacks had just arrived in Europe in October as refugees from Syria and were processed into Europe in Greece and made their way immediately to France and began plotting this mass murder. And so it isn't as if the idea of refugees being involved in jihad terror plots is something that has no foundation in reality and it's just some sort of a nameless fear. Even in our own country, Tamerlan and Dzhokhar Tsarnaev, the Boston Marathon bombers, were asylum seekers from Dagestan, and so they had been admitted into the country on humanitarian grounds and on the basis of the compassion and care for the needy and the downtrodden that we are taught to have, and rightly so. But at the same time, they had a very different agenda, and not to take that into account at all and to say that those who are taking it into account are somehow being uncharitable, I think is a false definition of charity.
Right. And Mary, thank you again for your contribution today on Take Two. And, Robert, I just wanted to real quickly, because before we get to Julie in Tampa, Florida, who's also waiting patiently, you just kind of brought this up on the tail end of your comment. I struggle with this, Robert, and maybe you could help. I know I'm probably not the only one struggling with this. I know my husband feels the same way, and I don't know if, Jerry, if you feel the same way as well. It's like whenever you say anything that's a little bit contrary to this blanket be the everything Christian you can possibly be, all of a sudden you become like this person that's an anti-Christian or a hater or somebody who's very different. It bothers me terribly because I'm personally, I will tell you, I'm probably one of the most giving people in the whole entire universe. I give to everything I can possibly give. Thank you, Jerry. But I have to tell you, Robert, this frightens me that we don't have a proper vetting process in place. I mean, where is the common sense in this? I mean, to me, this is so logical. I mean, everybody wants to. Everybody wants to help these poor people, and I understand that. But is there any way we can do this so that we're all safe? Why do we have to open ourselves up to where we can't go to sleep at night? We sleep with a baseball bat under our bed or something because we're so nervous that something's going to happen. I mean, that to me is a little bit of it's kind of a little off. Are we?
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
It's quite a bit off, and it's a false understanding of charity. And it would be nice if we could have in the church in America today a mature public discussion of what the nature of charity really is. Mm-hmm. Instead, as you've pointed out, those who raise prudential issues in this regard, and prudence is a virtue as well, are instead demonized all too often. And, well, this is the story of my life going back years. But I think that in the church today there's a tendency to confuse being charitable with being nice. And there's some sort of idea, some sort of unspoken assumption that people have that we just have to be nice, even to the point of civilizational and societal suicide. And, well, I very strongly and respectfully object. That's not what charity is.
All right, I want to try to get to a couple more phone calls here because we got some great calls on the line. So, Prissa, if you will stand by, you're going to be right after Julie, who's calling from Tampa, Florida. Julie, welcome to Take Two with Jerry and Debbie and our guest, Robert Spencer. Hi, Julie.
Hi. Thank you very much for your show, and thank you, Robert. I appreciate you bringing all this to light and helping us to, see what's really going on. My only comment was that I think we should be compassionate to the refugees, and I would suggest that we bring the women and the children in first and, provide them, with care, and that if the men, I would say that we need to allow the Christian men to come in when they've been, vetted properly, and also the Muslim men. But that would be the order that I would take the refugees. And I thank you very much for your show.
Yeah, Robert, this was touched upon a little bit earlier. Go ahead, Robert.
It sounds commonsensical, and it makes perfect sense. But the thing is, this has already been ruled out. Obama scolded the opponents of his plan not long ago for wanting to admit only Christian refugees and not Muslims. And he made it out as if it were an exercise in religious bigotry to take only the Christians and not Muslims, when actually the difference was encapsulated by a video that was published yesterday of refugees in Italy who were being interviewed. And one of them said, "I'm very happy to be here. I'm a Christian." And they were asking if they approved of the Paris attacks. And he said, "No, the Paris attacks were terrible. I'm a Christian. We do not kill." And then they interviewed quite a few of the Muslim refugees, and they all approved of the Paris attacks and said that they had it coming because they criticized Muhammad and so on. And so this is a distinction that we have to make on the basis of prudence and on the basis of the security of our own people and national security, our homes and our families. And it's not about religious bigotry. It's about simply letting in somebody who might kill you versus somebody who won't.
Okay. Thank you, Robert. Thank you, Julie, for your contribution. We're going to move right along to Prissa. Prissa, we only have a few minutes, but we wanted to get you on the show. You're calling in from Portland, Oregon. Welcome to the show, Prissa.
Hi. Thank you for your shows, and thank you for the great work you guys are doing. I'm just trying to contribute my own view about this whole thing. I think the pause button that the Congress gave to these bringing in the Syrian refugees, I think, is a good idea because I will attest to it. I'm a Nigerian, and I witnessed a lot of the devastation caused by the Boko Haram. It is horrible. It is absolutely horrible. And I'm a nurse, and I worked among the Muslims. They are, oh my gosh, I don't know a word to qualify that because you work with them, they will openly tell you that they will kill you if you are not careful. Yes, I tell you what I know and I tell you what I experienced. It is horrible. When you walk with someone with your free mind, you show your love and everything, they don't give a damn about whatever you are doing for them. When the time comes for the rioting or the bombing of a thing, you will be the fourth person to be attacked. So bringing in the Syrian refugees, I will not say it's not a good idea. The ones that are harmless, but it is difficult for you to differentiate all these people, the good from the bad. How are you going to know them? You don't know their background. You don't know who they are. You just accept whatever they tell you. So I think the solution is look for places where they are in the Syrian, and then camp them there and give them whatever you want to give them, then bringing them into your home. Just like a caller that said, we should listen to what the Pope and the Bishop said. Jesus never told us as Christians not to protect ourselves. Yeah, you might welcome a stranger, and in the process of welcoming a stranger, you welcome angels. But in this situation right now, we know that it is due to the war and the fighting in Syria that is making a lot of people to mix with them and going into people's country and causing a lot of problems. So I'm not.
Prissa, forgive me, Prissa. We got probably about 90 seconds. I do want to give Robert you a chance to respond here, and again, about 90 seconds. Thank you, Prissa, for a very, very eloquent take. Stay on the line so you can hear Robert's comments to your take there.
The Lord did indeed never say that we should act to protect ourselves, but to be prudent in regard to the Syrian refugees is to protect those around us and to protect our families, our loved ones, our neighbors, our friends, our communities. And that is an obligation of Christian charity, no less than to welcome the stranger.
All right, Debbie, I don't know if you had any, insights on what Prissa shared.
Prissa, amazing that you took the time to share with us. You really opened our eyes in a lot of the reality. So thank you, Prissa, and we just thank you for all your work. And please continue to pray for the show Take Two. And Jack in Texas and Chuck in Virginia, we want to hear from you. So please keep the conversation going on take2show.com. We want to hear what your take was on this topic. I'm just completely in awe of our listeners, Jerry. I think there are... this is an amazing conversation we had today, and I think it really helped us to get the facts, to pray about this situation, to give what we can in a prudent way, and I think it was very helpful. I know it was for me.
Yeah, Robert, would you care to give your information out, your website, or however people might find out about the work that you're doing? Sure.
My website is Jihad Watch, and that's at jihadwatch.org. JIHAD watch.org. You can see right up there today the video I just referred to of the refugees in Italy being interviewed and the Muslim refugees approving of the Paris attacks. It's a news and commentary site with a great deal of material about the global jihad and material that you won't find anywhere else. And also I am the author of 14 books, most recently The Complete Infidel's Guide to ISIS, which is at any self-respecting bookstore as well as at Amazon.com.
All right, jihadwatch.org for Robert Spencer and his work. Debbie, my takeaway is it's almost a no-win situation trying to strike the balance between compassion and prudence. I just simply say, Jesus, help us do the right thing.
Amen to that. Tomorrow's show is about self-image. When you look into the mirror, what do you see? Do you like what you see? Stay with us tomorrow on Take Two. Until then, have a beautiful and blessed day. See you tomorrow.